Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select Resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest this week is Dan Linna. Dan Linna has a joint appointment at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law and McCormick School of Engineering as a senior lecturer and the director of law and technology initiatives. His teachings and research focus on innovation and technology, including computational law, artificial intelligence, data analytics, leadership, operations, and innovation frameworks. He's also an affiliated faculty member of Codex, the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. Dan received his BA from the University of Michigan, received a second BA and MA in Public Policy and Administration from Michigan State University, and graduated magna cum laude, Order of the Cough from University of Michigan Law School. He began his legal career with a one-year judicial clerkship for the U.S. Court of Appeals Judge James L. Ryan. After his clerkship, he joined Honigman, Miller, Schwartz, and Kahn. I always get caught up by the names, and Cohn, where he was elected equity partner in 2013. Before law school, Dan was an information technology manager, developer, and consultant. Dan, welcome.
Thank you, George. Great to join you.
Glad to have you here. This, I think, should be an interesting session. We've got a lot to cover. We'll see how far we get through all of this. I'd like to start as our first topic with how innovation and technology adoption are transforming or should transform law practice.
Yeah, well, it's a really exciting time. I think we've been seeing a lot more happen in this space the last 5 years. When I was practicing at Honigman, the starting point for it was eDiscovery, technology assisted review, coming along. And I remember some of the early conversations I had with people, some inside my firm, some in other firms, judges, others. And there was a lot of skepticism at first about, well, we can't use these machines. They're not going to be nearly as good as the humans who are doing the review. This is decades before the lawyers trust it, before the judges trust it. And well, we saw that wasn't the case. And one of the reasons why was because there was some good research that helped us show that actually, when humans were reviewing documents, the quality wasn't quite as high as we would like to think that when we actually studied it. And it turns out these technology tools did a pretty good job when reviewing these documents. And so one of the things I'm really excited about is some of the research and work we're doing here at Northwestern, some of the work that I'm doing with my colleagues in computer science, where we have research projects, we have classes, we're developing different technologies. And we want to bring a little bit more rigor to this space so that we can help drive innovation forward, keep improving legal services delivery at the highest end, the biggest law firms and corporate legal departments, legal tech companies, but also to improve access to law and access to legal services and justice.
So let's start trying to unpack some of that and see how much I remember in my head to get to, but hopefully you'll remind me. Let's start with the research that you all are working on right now. What are you focusing on?
Well, I think there's a couple of different threads, and some of the writing I've been doing recently is trying to highlight some of the work that's been done to evaluate the quality, the effectiveness of eDiscovery. Maura Grossman and Gordon Cormack have done some great work there. There are several others that part of the NIST program, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, did work on analyzing the eDiscovery process. And we really need to bring more of that to law practice. So I've been doing some writing and just kind of highlighting the lack of evidence-based practice in law. I mean, even before we think about technology, we just have these challenges about when we're lawyers, we have a great deal of autonomy and we kind of get to decide how we want to do things. And there are some norms, kind of communities of practice where we kind of agree that there are general ways to do things. But I mean, George, if you and I were in a law firm and we could do things radically differently, and we tend to not be evidence-based. We don't capture information about outcomes. So we don't really know necessarily, George, you like to do things one way, I do it a different way. Generally things turn out okay, but we really don't know, right? We're not evidence-based in the way we go about doing things. So some of that research is just about being, bringing more science to what we do and being able to measure quality, understand the way we do things and what it is that we do in the legal industry as lawyers or other legal professionals that actually produces the kind of results we want to see. And I think we really need that foundation. Some of this is happening in the practice. We see it as more attention to process improvement and project management, gathering data, really trying to measure things. And I'd like to see more research, and we're seeing aspects of this in a variety of universities where we're seeing more rigorous study of law practice, legal systems, so we can generate more of the things we're supposed to produce with the rule of law for people.
How do you go about measuring what lawyers do? I know when I started practicing, what people would say, and I continue to hear them say this, is some variation of what I do is unique. Nobody else can do it. Nobody else can do it the way I do it. I do it the best possible way. You can learn from me how to do that as well, which is a mixed message right there. And no machine can, of course, do what I do because, once again, what I do is unique. If it's unique, it's not really measurable. So what do you do in all of this to actually measure things?
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing some of that breaking down, and we're realizing that there actually can be standards for how we do things. So when we start measuring outcomes and just asking questions about, I think even just like an example I'll give that I've been talking about is like even just drafting a contract. And we can start doing more we're seeing data analytics being brought to bear in this space. Some of the people who do work in this space will see that they'll go to a firm and the firm will say, well, this is the way we do things. But then you analyze the contracts and you start finding out that maybe that's not the way they actually do things, and they draft different clauses and things like that. So we can better understand how's the work actually being done, what sort of standards are emerging around the way you might draft clauses or the way negotiations play out to result in a contract being drafted a certain way. And then more and more, especially the clients are really driving this about being more intentional about asking, how do our contracts get drafted? What sort of terms are in them? How much does it cost to get different terms? An example you'll hear sometimes is the in-house counsel will say, we spend a lot of money negotiating these indemnification provisions, a lot. And do we ever actually try to enforce them? Do we ever litigate about these things? Does this ever actually bring us any value that we care about? And what about the costs that come along with that? Because it's not just time of the lawyers and others negotiating the clauses, but it's longer time to close the deal. Do you lose deals sometimes because you're negotiating these provisions? We can learn a lot from just process improvement methodologies about thinking about measuring some of these concepts and really understanding, well, what are the things that we do that really bring value? And, when we, in our training, when we get trained as lawyers, we often tend to think about, I was a litigator and I think about, the client got sued. What does the client need? The client needs an answer to the complaint, maybe a motion to dismiss, some discard. No, that's not what the client needs, right? The client doesn't care about any of that. They want a solution to their problem. And when we start thinking more like someone who thinks about lean thinking or process improvement, it forces us to really put ourselves in the client's shoes and think about, well, what are the things the client thinks about and how could we measure the value we provide to the client and the quality of the different things that we provide to the client? And so that's kind of a place to get started with many of these things.
So I'm going to jump to the side a little bit in this discussion because of something you just said. Language you used is similar to language I've heard from Richard Susskind. So there's you, there's Richard Susskind, but I suspect only a limited number of people who are either in academia the way you are. I don't know that Richard's actually in academia, but there's a certain academic patina to what he does. How many of you are there out there looking at the types of things you're looking at?
I think there's a growing number of people. I mean, Richard is still connected at Oxford. I don't know quite how active he is, but he has some connections there. There is a growing number of law schools that are doing more and more things in this space, and there is definitely more research. I think one of the things about the emergence of artificial intelligence, there's been more and more analysis of the ways in which AI is being used to deliver legal services, is being used in not just law practice, but also in courts and administrative agencies. So we're seeing more and more research there. I think we're really starting to see these different questions converge, which is something I've wanted to see happen for a very long time, because I think the early stages of law and technology in the academy was really focused on, well, what is the law that applies to technologies? How are we going to govern these things? Mm-hmm. And there's been a little bit more growth of thinking about, well, how are we going to innovate? How do we use technologies in legal services delivery, in courts? I think these really need to all come together, right? Because to me, like what we're asking is, well, what is law going to look like in a digital world? And so you can't just, if you silo these two sides, right? The way we deliver legal services, the way we give advice to people, well, that's going to change based on the way we write law in the future. Today, law is largely unavailable to people. And it was only through lawyers that people could get access to it. And now, of course, they can Google and they can find things. But even then, it's hard to even just get access to the primary law. Well, in the future, I think, when we're all walking around with smart computers and supercomputers in our pocket, what should people's access to law look like then? And might we start, there's research now being done too about thinking about how we might change even the form of law. To what extent might algorithms be embedded in law? And so I think it becomes really clear, like, why this whole ecosystem, we need to think about the different pieces of it. And there are more and more people who are studying this. And I think there's this proliferation of robot judges articles, for example, which I think is, it's a little bit out there, but it's interesting, and it helps start connecting some of these pieces together. So we're seeing definitely more and more research being done in this space, and more instruction, like training. I think this is the other thing too, is too often in this space, we kind of talk about it like, well, what's going to happen in the future? What's going to happen to lawyers as a profession? How are things going to unfold? It's like, well, hey, heck, let's be proactive. Let's ask, what should the future look like? And then let's start doing the work to create that future. And that's what we're trying to do here at Northwestern. And there are several other universities that are really trying to think about training the students in computer science, in law. This isn't just a law school thing, training those students who are going to create that future.
So what are you doing at Northwestern to help train the students you work with?
Yeah, well, we've got, the partnership here between the law school and the engineering school is outstanding. We have a dean, Julio Otino, in engineering, who talks about whole brain engineering, and he's very open about they've got several computer science plus programs across the university. And our dean here, our interim dean, is Jim Speta. We've been working with him on the program. We've got a new dean coming in, Harry Osofsky, she was at Penn State previously, and really wants to push the law and technology initiative further, right? Sees these possibilities for these interdisciplinary connections across campus. One of the things we do, we have an innovation lab where we have computer science students and law students. They work side by side on project teams. They develop prototype technology solutions. They do that with outside partners. We've worked with the Dominican Republic on a project, the judiciary. We've worked with large.
Before you get there, that what you were just mentioning, haven't you done some competitions or workshops or something along that line with that area?
Yeah, we've done a variety of workshops. With the initiative, we've been having like these monthly meetings where we bring in different people. We've been trying to build community of academics, but also of practitioners. And Chris Hammond and I, for example, put on a workshop on AI and law, kind of like some training. And well, what is AI? What are the different tools? How are these tools being used now? What are the risks? What are the benefits? Things like that. And then we've got a variety of classes for our students all around these areas.
One of the issues that maybe doesn't always come up, but certainly should come up, and which you alluded to earlier, is the impact that the introduction of technology could have to improve access to law and justice for everyone. What are you seeing there? What would you like to see there?
I think we're seeing a large number of legal aid organizations that are investing more and more in creating technology tools. Illinois Legal Aid Online here in Chicago is a world leader in that space. In Michigan, they also have a technology division that I was very well aware of, and that has been doing things in this space. A lot of this is around kind of document automation sort of solutions and expert systems. I think we're seeing this evolve now more and more into, there's a chatbot here in Chicago called Rentervention. And a matter of fact, a colleague of mine, someone who's visiting from Purdue, she and I just put a research study, a proposal in that we would like to study systems like that to better understand how these AI social dialogue systems could be used to help provide advice to people so they better understand their rights, also understand their obligations, understand how they can work their way through any sort of problems they might have in that space. I think there's all sorts of opportunities to continue to develop tools to help people better understand the law and how to handle different problems. We see different tools like do not pay people talk about from time to time. You start off with fighting parking tickets. There are a variety of areas that it's working in. But I think that's an area where we're going to see more and more activity. And I'd like to see it be more proactive. I think a research university, one thing that we can add to that is I'd like to see more study of how well these tools work. And some people are worried that as we develop legal technology, that it's really going to result in second-class justice for people who use those tools. And of course, that should be a concern that we have. But I think that's why we should do the research, so that we can demonstrate that, in fact, we can use these tools to provide first-class justice to people. And what we can do is we know we have limited human resources when we talk about legal aid. Well, we can figure out how to get the right sorts of matters that can be solved with legal technology tools. And then when people need a human lawyer to help with something, get those people engaged to really help there. I mean, it's a really interesting area, even just thinking about delivery, again, going back just to the human aspect of delivering services, how little we really know about. There have been a handful of studies, but not nearly enough about when lawyer intervention really makes a difference, right? And so if we can learn more about that, learn where technology really works and can really help people, but then learn where they really need a lawyer, or it's not all about lawyers either. There's other professionals, including with legal training. We have a Master of Science in Law program here at Northwestern. I'd love to see more and more that we'll see opportunities for people with less than a JD to help solve these problems as well. But yeah, I think Justice Bridget McCormick has kind of said, like, all gas, no brakes, right? Kind of like we need to just keep pushing this forward. I think there are a lot of huge opportunities. We need to be responsible and do the research as we're going. But I think there's a lot of promise and potential as we do that.
You have at Northwestern an innovation lab and a law and technology initiative. Tell us more about those.
Yeah, those are really the foundation for those classes in that program is really our partnership with computer science. And, I mentioned the deans in law and engineering, the computer science chair and other computer science faculty are very much involved in this. Chris Hammond and I, computer science professor, we teach the innovation lab and done projects where we develop technology there. And, I teach a class called AI and Legal Reasoning. Want to expose our students to what is AI, right? How is technology review used in eDiscovery? But how is that same and similar technologies being used for contract review, diligence, expert systems? How can analytics, just helping them understand the current state as we're seeing these tools used now, but getting them to be more, to get them thinking strategically about how, when they join a law firm, they can think about, how am I going to innovate? How am I going to use people, process, data, technology to improve the service delivery for my clients? And then another aspect of it is just law of, right? And I teach a law of AI and robotics class. And then we teach classes on, there's a lot of discussion about ethics these days. And there are a lot of engineering schools, computer science department that are talking about ethics. One thing, and we're biased as lawyers here, but I say, like, well, wait a second. If you're going to talk about ethics, you've got to talk about law as well. It's wonderful to think about what are the morals and ethics around this, but we need law to backstop this, right, in the future. And so having the opportunity to teach classes like Law of AI in our MSAI program, our Masters of AI program, and then Introduction to Law and Digital Technologies. And we're doing more work around thinking about how we can further develop that. So there's a lot of exciting, law, we see all these shows about lawyers and things like that, right? When you reach out to people across the university and you say, no, like, we shouldn't have a moat around the law school or the legal profession. No, there are tough problems to solve here. We want your help. Oh, and by the way, like, these issues about ethics of technology and trusting technology, we know something about that in the legal profession too. I think we can help there. Like, let's work together.
Is it a revelation to them that we know something about that and that we can help them out?
I think in many ways it is. And I think that one of the challenges for, I think in some ways, we're not always the best of collaborators as lawyers, right? And we have trouble sometimes, I think, in the legal profession, like, where you're supposed to be the smartest person in the room, kind of, and sometimes, like, letting your guard down, being curious and asking questions about things. It's kind of hard to do sometimes, the way you've been trained to be a lawyer, and that doesn't always make for the best partner or collaborator. And it's required for innovation, right? To kind of be able to. So I think that it is a bit of a revelation when you go to engineers, you go to computer scientists, and you say, let's work together, right? And we can, I'm not going to ask for you to bring technology or computer science to be in service of law. Let's have an actual true partnership and think about what we can create for the future and solve some of these problems.
Some of the big societal issues.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. So with all of those things in mind, how do you evaluate things like effectiveness, quality, the value the tools bring to bear to technology, to legal services delivery?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different ways. There are a lot of methods that we can bring to bear. I think there's a lot to learn from technology assisted review, from eDiscovery, just looking at like precision, recall, F measure, understanding what that means. And there's also a lot of discussion when I talk about technology in the world about bias, right? And so, for example, there have been some really interesting studies. Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru, they did a study at MIT looking at face recognition systems and just basic information retrieval statistics, precision, recall, F measure, and they find that, gee, these tools, it turns out, work pretty well for white men, but not well at all for women of color, right? And just bringing those sorts of methods to be used and to these other types of tools. And so I think we're seeing more and more people thinking about that. You can apply the same sort of thing to contract review tools. We can think of different ways. There's just been so little work done on kind of evaluating lawyer service delivery. This study I talked about a minute ago about chatbots, I think there are a variety of things that we can measure. We can measure the quality of the advice. We can find ways to try to come up with better standards about, well, when a tenant is experiencing X, Y, Z, what is the right advice? What is the right approach? And we can test for those things. But we can also try to understand, what is it in the lawyer-client relationship that actually results in being able to get the information needed from a client to be able to give them the right advice. And that's something we train our lawyers on. I don't know that we do enough study. There's some research on that to understand what makes for the most effective lawyer-client relationships. But taking that, what we've learned from that, and then how do we evaluate some of these technology tools? How do we understand, measuring outcomes is a big problem across this whole space. We do so many things as lawyers that we don't know what the result is from the activity. So we measure activity, we have all these billable hours, and even that's really kind of messy trying to deconstruct that, but that's, we're seeing more and more good work around that, and there's a lot more to be done. But if we can tie that to outcomes, if we can learn better, well, what is it that we do as lawyers that actually produces the results that we want to see in different manners? And learning that about that the lawyers and other legal professionals, the work that they're doing, will help us better think about how we can create these technology tools, these systems to help people, whether they're people in businesses. There's some big fancy law firms that are really pushing the envelope and thinking about how to create technology tools to do that. I think we can learn from what they're doing in what we're doing in legal aid to think about how we can help consumers with different problems. And the more we can expand this space, learn from each other, but study things in rigorous ways, I think that's the role of the university in this space, right? We're very much anecdote based right now in this space. And the more that we can get disciplined and bring some of the, when I went back and talked, what I was talking about, the eDiscovery testing, right? Some scientific testing of how these tools work. And, that's what we need to see more of across the whole space of legal services delivery.
So one of the questions I know that has come up in the past when people talk about that type of scientific testing is, how do you actually go about it? It's not as if you're going to have two versions of a lawsuit, a control lawsuit and the actual lawsuit, to take measurements side by side. How do you go about that?
Yeah, well, I think that's right. There are a lot of other ways, though, in which we can measure things. I think there is a ton that we can learn from medicine. And sometimes when I compare to medicine, people say, oh, but that's a science. Well, okay, but 120 years ago, medicine was at about the same place as law. And they kind of just had communities of standards and things like that. And they may have agreed on a certain way to treat things, but there wasn't a lot of data being kept on what were the outcomes, what actually happens when we do that. We don't necessarily need to be doing randomized controlled trials to learn a lot, right? Just even different case studies and gathering this information can help us reveal patterns. The gold standard is to do randomized controlled trials. We did a project in Michigan when I worked with the district court judge there, and there were lawyers available for some of the parties who were being sued for a handful of judges, but one of the judges wasn't participating in the project for a variety of reasons. And that was kind of like a natural experiment in a sense, where we were collecting data and we could kind of see, well, what is the impact of someone being provided a lawyer at a particular time in the proceedings? So I think, Jim Greiner at Harvard has done a lot of writing and testing around this. And there's all sorts of ways in which we can bring greater rigor to this space. Randomized controlled trials, that's like the gold standard, but even just being more, if I went back, I go back to my practice at Honigman, and I was trying to be more rigorous, and I could have done a lot better job, but just thinking, if you're a litigator, are you capturing information about, you file these motions, what happened in the case, what was the result, what was the prediction that you made, and that you told the client, what did it actually end up being? All these things. This goes back to, in a lot of ways, it's maybe a little less about pure science and just kind of the continuous improvement principle. And if you're gathering information about that, if you know, like, when you get something wrong, when you get it right, and asking why and how can we do better next time, that's the key to continuing to do better.
And with lawyers' lives largely driven by the billable hour, how do we get that information captured?
Yeah, I think the incentives need to change. And I think part of it is we're going to see more and more movement away from the billable hour, I think, on different things. And there's a variety of reasons for it. I think lawyers tend to assume that means a race to the bottom and that clients always want it cheaper, but I don't think that's always the case. I mean, it drives the clients nuts that they say, well, my rate's $600 an hour, but who knows? It's like, I got to get budget to pay you. I mean, so it just the certainty of a budget, it's not always about doing it for less, but they want value. And so I think they're pushing more and more of that. And so really, it's the clients who are driving this. They're pushing for this. They're evaluating it. And if you should really think, if you're the lawyer or a professional in another organization or any organization, and you're talking to the client and you're not able to articulate to the client how they can measure the quality of what you do for them and the value that you provide to them, well, you're not in a good spot, because you can bet that they're trying to figure out how to assess that. And they might think you don't measure out to someone else, right? So I think we need to get lawyers and other professionals to be much more proactive about being able to describe to the client about, based on the way I understand the problems we're solving for you, like, this is how you should measure the quality of what I do for you. This is how you should measure the value that I provide for you, and kind of reporting that back. Like, here, look what I did for you. Like, oh, remember I predicted this lawsuit would cost this much and this would be the outcome. Well, here's what we delivered and this is the value. And I think there's more and more of a movement for the external lawyers and professionals to do that for the client. For sure, the clients are doing it, right? So, from my perspective, I put myself back at Honigman. I'd much rather be kind of defining for the client how I think they should, and having them give me feedback on that versus, clients rarely fire their lawyers, right? It's just like you don't hear from them again, and they kind of have moved on somewhere else. So,
yeah, they've ghosted you.
Yes, right. Yeah, exactly.
Have you got any coming attractions for us? Things that you're working on that we should pay attention to, something that you're writing or publishing we should be waiting for?
Well, I've been I've been working on this project, the Legal Services Innovation Index, and we did a big update right before the pandemic. And I'd hoped to be doing some more work on that and cleaning it up. And the pandemic just ate up a lot of time on a lot of different things. So I'm working on that more and doing some research also on innovation in law firms. I'm partnering with another university on that. So I'm excited about that. Might be a little bit while still before that starts coming out, but I think there's a lot to learn about, I'd like to see more case studies and studies of what's actually happening. But that's the Innovation Index is one of the reasons for doing that is I want to be able to point to observations of what's actually happening in the legal industry, the way firms are changing, what they're doing and what they're delivering for clients. And then in connection with the Law and Technology Initiative here at Northwestern, we're going to continue to do a variety of monthly programs, bringing in people who are pushing the envelope on innovation and technology adoption in legal services delivery, but then also academics who are doing research. We did a conference, Law Plus Computation, earlier this year, and we had over 800 people who registered. We had over 500 people there from over 65 countries, and we're going to make that an annual conference. So we're looking forward to doing that again this upcoming year. So the program, the initiative is still relatively in its early stages. But we're continuing to develop partnerships with law firms, legal departments, legal tech providers, other organizations as well. Like I said, Dominican Republic Judiciary. We want to keep working with courts and legal aid organizations. So we're like most organizations who are trying to become excellent at what we're doing around this. That we're still testing and refining things, right, and trying to keep improving what we're doing and trying to figure out where we can really add value for our students and for our outside partners in this space.
Great. Well, thanks, Dan. Daniel Linna is Senior Lecturer and Director of Law and Technology Initiatives at both Northwestern, and how's the proper pronunciation, Pritzker?
Pritzker, yes.
Pritzker School of Law and McCormick School of Engineering. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Thanks for joining us today. Please join us again on Friday, July 23rd, when our guest will be Christiana Muller-Hea, if I got that correctly, who is a Regional Technology Director, Central Europe at Clifford Chance. Dan, thanks so much for taking time to spend with us today.
Glad to do it. Really great chatting with you, George. Thank you.